Hi everyone, I hope everyone is keeping well. Welcome to another episode of the Friday Floating. So we're going to hopefully have Kelly McNulty join us soon, and we're going to be talking about female physiology research, menstrual cycle, combined pill, all that good stuff. I'll just let her in now. Hi Ratna. Hello. How are you doing?
Hello, are you all right?
Yes, I'm good. How are you getting on?
I've got you so elegantly balanced. So if I suddenly like drop away, then
Start sliding
yeah,
downwards.
yeah, then that's where that's gonna go. I can see it
That's no
happening.
problem.
Are you
That's no
okay?
problem.
Can you hear me okay as well? Am I?
Yeah,
Yeah,
perfectly.
perfect.
No, no,
No, these
you're lovely and
headphones are a
clear.
disaster as well. So fingers crossed.
I don't, no, you'll be fine. Sure, we've had it all happen. My Wi-Fi's cut out on other talks, so we've
Yeah,
been through
it's
it
all
all.
happened.
um,
Perfect.
Look, thanks so much for joining me on a Friday. Obviously, huge fan of your Instagram account, as I'm sure a lot of people who follow me are also a massive fan. What I love is just like it makes the research papers that are out there, very accessible. And I know it's a big part of what you do as well. So I'm sure it's kind of a double whammy for you where you get to kind of share what you're kind of currently reading and learning about and
Reading,
everything.
yeah,
So it's, yeah, exactly. So I'm always like, oh, what you reading now? What you can post about? So it's always great to see the stuff coming through. But I guess for those who don't know you, do you want to kind of give us a little intro about yourself, kind of talk about the work that you do, and then we'll go from there.
yeah, sure. So I'm a PhD student and studying at Northumbria University. So been there for my undergraduate and masters, and now you can't get rid of me. But my
Yeah.
main sort of research interest is around the female athlete, and I'm specifically looking at the effects of the menstrual cycle and hormonal contraceptive use on performance, recovery, adaptation in sports women. So yeah, really interesting area. To be honest, it wasn't really something, a PhD wasn't something that I had in my mind at all. So not from an academic background, and I didn't really know what a PhD was until I was riding that roller coaster. But no, it's best decision that I've ever made or ever was given, really. So no, it's
Mm.
great.
And what kind of was that, I guess, process for you going in? Like, what was your undergrad to the masters? Like, what kind of led you into this area? Because it's obviously, it's really exploded. Like, even in the past, like, let's say 6 months to a year, like you're
Yeah.
seeing more and more kind of research papers coming out. Everyone's talking about it now. But it really wasn't something that was kind of discussed even 18 months, 2 years ago. It's pretty quiet on the research front. So, what kind of got you into this as your area?
Yeah, definitely. So I've always had that keen interest in human physiology and sort of optimizing performance, particularly sort of at that sort of elite level when you see that team behind the sort of winning the gold medals, etc. So
Yeah.
always kind of had that interest. And so I went in to do a sports science degree and then followed that with a master's in strength and conditioning. And in and around that time, so I did sort of 2 days masters, and the rest of the time I was strength and conditioning, and I was working mainly with golfers. And that's my background,
Amazing.
so I'm a golfer.
Oh,
That's what, well, was a golfer, sort of play for fun now. But yeah, so I was
yeah.
part of that high performance pathway as part of golf. And I guess for me, sort of, that's when it kind of started sort of clicking and realizing that my menstrual cycle was having an influence on my performance and on my training. And
Okay.
there wasn't really sort of many sort of questions, or no one could answer my questions, or there wasn't really much sort of evidence around it. And it was just kind of really lacking in that area. And
Mm.
anyone that I talked to didn't really know much. And yeah, so I guess that I kind of realized that research gap there, and then wanted to be part of like sort of bridging that. And then, yeah, so again, like what I said, so PhD wasn't on the radar, and my supervisor came to me at the time and she was like, "Oh, we've got this sort of PhD that I think you'd really suit and you'd be really interested
Mm.
in." And so I kind of went for it from there. So I was really lucky in that way. But I did always have that sort of question then of, does my menstrual cycle and then hormonal contraceptive use affect my performance and training? And I guess for a lot of the time we trained like the boys in that. So a lot in golf we were
Mm.
kind of mixed in that whatever the boys would do, we were applying that sort of performance training, whatever else it was. And it wasn't really sex specific to us. But I guess now, like you say, we've had that sort of massive increase in women participating in sport. So if we go back
Yeah.
in time, sort of like 1800s, women were sort of cautioned against exercise. So we were
Yeah.
told that if we did any running or jumping, our reproductive organs would like fall out or it wouldn't be
Yeah.
good. So that's kind of like where that came from. And then we were kind of, it wasn't until the 60s and 70s that that change started to happen and women got more opportunities in sport. And you've just kind of seen that progress. So if you take London 2012, so the first Olympic Games where they had a woman in every team, and then you've got the 2016. So I think women won more total medals than men. I think it was in 29 countries that year. So you can
Oh,
see
wow.
that we've got that sort of increase in trend, and then you get to now 2021, the Tokyo Olympics, and that participation seemed to be split between 50% men and 50% women athletes. So you can
Fantastic.
see that massive rise. And then I guess as women are pursuing that sort of peak sport and performance, we need to start thinking sort of differently about how they're sort of getting there almost, because
Yeah.
just like the men, we want to get faster, we want to get stronger, we want to achieve those gold medals. And for a long time, I guess we've kind of trained in a similar way, which is great because the research does benefit men and women, and
Yeah.
these people have been training high performance people for ages, so obviously they're doing something right. But I guess at that sort of fundamental level, is it optimal for female athletes? And I guess that's where my interest kind of came in around menstrual cycle and all the other female specific factors. So yeah, I'm just
Yeah. And
blabbering away here, so feel free
no,
to
no,
stop me.
it's so fascinating. And I'm like, oh my God, that's such a good point, such a good point. But like it's even to that, like I remember I was actually commenting to my partner at the moment we were watching the rugby, and I was like, even just having, I would have grown up, my parents are like big into sport. I always kind of watch sport like
Yeah.
every weekend and stuff, and my mum would love, going to have to send this on to her because she's a rules official in golf, like loves golf,
Oh,
like
okay.
mad about it,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. So my dad is as well, but my mum's particularly a big fan of it with the rules official stuff. But even for me, like would have been watching the rugby with them, and I played soccer and like hockey and stuff as a kid and everything. But there you never saw, except for the athletics. Like I remember with the athletics being on and stuff like that, like they kind of
Yeah.
you'd see the I guess the women competing, but I would like. And I'd love to get to a stage where it's not comment worthy, but like as someone who grew up when there wasn't any kind of female TMOs or referees or any of this kind of stuff, or even like commentators after like kind of a analyst after the match, I'm like, it actually does matter. You know what I mean? You're kind of like, well,
Yeah.
would have kind of stuck with different things or done, it just kind of makes it more, I guess, of like it just matters, like the eligible career
Yeah.
paths or being
Yeah.
like, oh, well, actually, I could do that, or I could talk about the sports, or and or I could get involved in the different research and stuff like that. So I think it's, even from like a socio-cultural point of view, the whole shift has
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
is huge. And like as someone who is a woman, it's really nice to see that happen and kind of be something that might change for kind of future generations where it is just the norm, and it's fantastic to see
Yeah.
participation. And I
Yeah.
think that the studies, as you were saying, is really really underpinning that. So I know you kind of had two kind of big papers 2020 that they kind of came out, and one of them you were kind of the leading researcher on it, and then I'm assuming Kirsty Elliott Sale was your supervisor when you're talking about the PhD and stuff like that. So is that your specific PhD that you published, or was it a different one?
Yeah, so that was the first sort of two chapters of my sort of PhD. So sort of the first two
Okay.
things that I was working on in that first year. And like you say, yeah, they both came out in 2020, but they were started in 2018. So it was a
Yeah.
massive task. And I guess like what you say is, so despite sort of all these women wanting to participate in sport and wanting to pursue that peak level of performance, when we look at the research hasn't kept up with that. So there's
Yeah.
this paper that we all go back to, and it's by Costello, and it shows that out of the top three sports science journals, only 4% of the research was done on women, which kind of shows
Mm.
you that sort of real data gap there. So massive rise in participation, but lacking in that research. And then when you take that one step further, so what is the quality of that research like as well? And what we wanted to
Hmm.
do is basically I sat down that first day of my PhD and we were like, where do we want to kind of take this? Where do we want to go? And we thought that we couldn't really go anywhere without knowing what we were working with first. And with so many studies saying one thing and then the other study saying
Yeah.
totally different. So there was a lot of confliction. So for every study that said there was an effect, there was one that said absolutely no effect. And we were like, well,
Yeah.
we can't really move on without looking at this first and getting a feel for what the whole area is saying. And then hopefully allowing us to all stop and then start again, basically. So we got all of these studies. So all the studies that said yes, all the studies that said no, and all the studies we could find, basically. And we then pooled them all together to see if the menstrual cycle was having an effect on exercise performance. And then the second paper was looking at oral contraception on exercise performance. But if we kind of look at that first paper, so the menstrual cycle one, when we kind of pool them all together, what we were seeing was that reduced performance in that early follicular phase compared to all other menstrual cycle phases. So this was performance for both strength and endurance combined. But the problem again is that when you kind of look at it, we've got quite a nice graph on it which shows all of the different variations. So you've still got this massive between study variation. And then when we were looking at the quality of the research, so we used a specific sort of quality scale, but we kind of tweaked it a little bit to incorporate sort of these menstrual cycle specific aspects. So we wanted to see if studies were taking sort of urinary ovulation kit measures. We wanted to see if they were taking blood measures and stuff like that. So stuff specific to menstrual cycle research. And when we kind of got all those studies together, so we pooled them all together, and what we found in terms of quality wise was that I actually made sure I printed the paper out because I was like, this is going to be really embarrassing if I forget the stat.
I read it before as well. I was like, I'm going to double go over the numbers again.
So most of the studies, so 42%, were classified as low in quality, which is like half of the research was low in quality.
Yeah,
and what we kind of say is that if you kind of got research that's like really high in quality, you don't need that many papers to sort of back it up, because that's what you want to be using to inform your practice. But when you've got sort of like not many papers and they're all low quality, like where do you go from there? Like, what is the true effect? Is there a true effect? And yeah, so I guess what we saw was pretty poor, and it was all because of those menstrual cycle methods. So those not taking urine ovulation kits and not taking bloods. And when we look at it, we basically want to be, because we think that these hormones, so estrogen and progesterone, are underpinning all these potential differences, we really need to be measuring those hormones if we want to see if that's what was making the difference. But most studies weren't doing that. And then, so what it all means is when you kind of take it together as a whole, because of the sort of really small effect and the massive variation in the effect, and then the low quality of those studies, it meant that we couldn't make those general guidelines on managing exercise performance across the menstrual cycle. And instead, that's where we kind of recommended that individualized approach. And I know that's so frustrating, but like that's kind of where we're at the minute, and that's the best approach if you think about it. So if you kind of think, what data is going to benefit me the most? Is it data on loads of women that I don't really know, or is it going to be my data that I've collected? Like, what would you rather sort of trust, sort of thing? And it is going to be your own data on yourself. So yeah, that's kind of where we recommended the likes of menstrual cycle tracking and getting to know, working on that case by case basis, really. Yeah, I've just rambled on again.
No, it's so good. Like, I actually remember when your paper came out, and I was working in the gym I work with, Fitter, Fast, Stronger, and Kat Dane, so she plays on the Irish women's rugby team, but she was a physio in the gym at the time. We were kind of good mates, and she's also doing research now into kind of like, I think it's like tackling an injury within kind of female rugby players. So really interesting. But like, I haven't done the, I guess, exercise physiology background. I came through kind of a topsy-turvy way and then like fell into my original true love, that is kind of personal training and kind of sports and exercise. But I love reading research papers, like definitely massive nerd when it comes to that stuff. So I remember sending it on to her and being like, oh my God, they've reviewed the papers and there's like such a high percentage that's like, you know, low quality. And I think like there's even more that were like moderate, like there was I think it was like 8% or there was a really small number of like high quality. And I was like, this is this is crazy. Because I remember once I started getting into it and like started trying to search things myself online, just going on to kind of like PubMed and seeing what was out there. And kind of the same thing as you, I was like, I don't know if I know it any better. Like, some is supporting what I think I know about this, and then some is supporting what it's not. So I remember when you guys came out and I was like, the tracking recommendation, I was like, perfect. Because even when I started bringing it in with some of my clients, that's what I was seeing, where some people were like me and felt awful when they were in their phase 4, and other people were like, I feel great. And I'm like, and then would feel bad around ovulation. So like, it was so different for different people. So like, I remember, I just like distinctly remember, because I was sending it to her on Slack and we were like reading it in the physio room and stuff, just being like, this is so cool. But and then I think as well, it's interesting to talk about like the other paper that you did, which is the oral contraceptive one, because there's that other paper, I think you put a thing up on it, it's the Larson one, where they're talking about the hormonal contraceptive use. I actually think you put the questions up on a post. I was like,
they are,
yeah, they're really good. But it's crazy when you read that paper, firstly how many athletes are actually using hormonal contraception, which like isn't good or bad, it's just an interesting fact. But then
Yeah,
also
yeah.
the I guess lack of knowledge, really, for want of a better word, about how the pill might impact your physiology, your hormones, kind of your overall body, your sports performance. So I guess do you want to talk a little bit about what that second paper was and kind of
Yeah, yeah,
what
yeah,
what led
definitely.
you to that?
So basically it's very similar to what we did with the menstrual cycle paper, and that we
Mm,
repeated it with that oral contraceptive users. And like 100% what you say is that we've got that really poor knowledge of the menstrual cycle, but also then we really know next to nothing about hormonal contraception, despite
yeah.
the majority of us actually taking it at some point. And even when you kind of go into terms of, like, I'm doing a study at the minute which is looking at recovery, which I'm sure we'll touch on, but
Yeah.
getting the women to sort of fill out this questionnaire, as in what kind of menstrual cycle, and also what type of hormonal contraception you're on. They're really struggling to even identify what type of hormonal contraception on, whether they're
Mm,
combined or progesterone only. And it kind of opened my eyes a little bit more in that we actually don't really know a lot about these and what we're actually taking, for one, but also how that
mm,
then affects our physiology, and then how that might affect our performance and training. And so, like what you say, in that sort of, there was a recent audit by Martin. I think it was 20, or I'm going to say 2017, but I'm probably wrong. And he basically looked at sort of all of the female athletes in the UK, and basically 50% of them were on hormonal contraception. So yes, we need more research and information on menstrual cycle and how to
mm.
support them, but we also can't forget about this other sort of 50% of sort of sportswomen, really, which for a long time
Yeah.
we have, because we forgot about the menstrual cycle, and now sort of we also forget about hormonal contraception. So
Mm,
yeah, so basically what we wanted to look at was a specific type. So the combined monophasic sort of oral contraceptive pill is the most commonly used in
yeah.
female athletes and the most researched. So we wanted to look at that combined pill basically and see if that had any influence on exercise performance. And again, just like the menstrual cycle paper, we got all the papers that were saying yes, no, just the mixed bag, and put
Yeah.
them together and tried to make some sort of understanding, make those guidelines again, but also review that quality of that research. And once we had all of that, we basically analysed it in exactly the same way. The only thing different was there was a little couple of questions different in the quality measure, just to suit hormonal contraception this time compared to menstrual cycle research.
Yeah.
And what we found was that performance was slightly reduced in that oral contraceptive group when you compared it to naturally menstruating women. So that was the first
Mm,
sort of one that we were looking at. So we were looking at oral contraceptive users versus naturally menstruating women. And we saw that sort of really small, trivial, reduced performance. And then the second thing we wanted to look at is, was exercise performance different across the oral contraceptive pill cycle? So
mm.
the oral contraceptive pill is basically designed to mimic that 28-day menstrual cycle. So you've got 21 pill taken days followed by those 7 pill free days.
Yeah.
And basically, we wanted to look at the difference in performance between consumption, so when taking those 21 pill taken days, compared to that withdrawal, so when you're not taking it during those 7 days, and see if there was any performance difference there, because the hormonal profile is sort of slightly different.
Yeah.
And what we found was, when we had all the studies together, we showed absolutely no difference between pill taking and pill withdrawal. So that's kind of good. So it means that most sportswomen won't see a difference between, or don't have to worry about whether they're on their oral contraceptive pill consumption or pill withdrawal. But where we were seeing the difference, like I said, was between oral contraceptive users, naturally menstruating women. But again,
Mm,
the thing is, here is a large variation again. So some sportswomen might be affected, some sportswomen will not be affected at all. So when you add all that together again, and also the quality of the research, so let me think off the top of my head. I think it was something like 80 something percent was
mm.
graded as low, very low, and moderate in quality. So again, you still had very little sort of high quality studies.
Yeah.
And so what we kind of concluded again from all of that is that it's best to take that individualized approach. So consider why your athlete's taking the oral contraceptive, and basically just, again, exactly what we recommended for the menstrual cycle is keep a track of it. You record your symptoms, what you experience, how your performance training, etc. might change, and take it from there, really.
Yeah, exactly. Because it is so individual. Like I remember myself when I was younger and I went on the pill for my skin originally, but then I was having like mood issues and I was kind of jumping between all the different ones. And I think I like literally
Yeah.
have gone on all of them out there until I kind of got to the point where I was like, okay, I'm just going to go with the
Yeah.
coil now because this just isn't really worth it anymore. But I
Yeah.
remember even at the time, like there was no real kind of education about what it did. Like I don't think I'm not even sure if I knew like that it actually stopped me producing my own hormones. Like I'm sure I did because I'm sure if I was like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, well I'm taking the synthetic forms, that on some
Yeah.
level I did, but I don't know if I kind of was consciously or like explicitly aware that that was what was happening, or like how that might impact. But what I loved about that paper as well was the kind of the fact that I think I'm going to misquote it all. So like, it's just, I guess, like an ad lib way of describing it. But you were like, you've got to kind of weigh up the pros and cons for each athlete. If someone is using it for a form of contraception and that's going to outweigh that like small percentage difference between the performance that we currently know about, like that's an important consideration to take into effect.
Yeah.
If they change to maybe like naturally tracking or even on the coil as well, like some people can get kind of heavier bleeds and can have kind of complications, stuff like that. So I just thought it was very good kind of being like, again, it's individual and I'm sure it's kind of frustrating for some people, but like I think it was great advice based on what we have now and kind of, for me, anyone, for someone who's tried to like incorporate that into the work that they do with their clients and everything, I find it quite useful to be like, okay, well, that is just the approach I'm taking with some recommendations about stuff, what the research papers might point towards,
Yeah.
but kind of helping figure that out with them and kind of seeing what that contraceptive or menstrual cycle is for them or what their symptoms are. So again, that kind of came out at the same time and I was like, this is great. I was like, I'm not going to pretend I understood all of the statistical analysis and stuff, but I,
Stats.
I
Yeah.
remember, yeah, exactly. I was like, not my vibe, but no, it was very interesting. But like, what are you kind of working on now? Is that like still part of the same PhD, and is it just kind of another kind of phase of that research?
Yeah, so basically, around that time when those reviews sort of were ending, I wasn't sort of sat at my computer just reading so many papers. Um, we kind of started this other study, which was looking at sort of the effects of the menstrual cycle again and hormonal contraception, so that oral contraceptive pill, on
Mm,
recovery from training. So basically, we looked at performance, but then we wanted to take
yeah,
that one step further and look at sort of training and recovery. And I guess my supervisor, Kirsty, she's got a good saying in that for a long time, you put the sort of, I'm going to get this wrong, you put the cart before the horse, in that the
yeah,
focus is all on performance, because that's the end point. That's kind of what we want to get to. And that's where the sort of money is really with female sport. But
yeah.
actually, to get to that point, you need to be adapting well, and you need to be recovering well from your training in order to perform. So even if there wasn't a difference with performance in those reviews, we then wanted to be like, look, there could potentially be a difference in the way we're sort of adapting to our training and recovering from our training. So
Mm,
there was very few studies. So there's very few studies in performance, but there's even fewer in training and recovery. And in terms of the training research, so this I think is really interesting in that generally at the minute, sort of strength training studies are showing that follicular phase based training. So this is training more in that follicular phase,
yeah,
compared to your luteal phase or across the menstrual cycle, might have greater adaptation in terms of muscle size, muscle strength in naturally menstruating women, which is really exciting to think that we could start to potentially exploit things like that.
yeah,
But the problem is there was only 4 studies there, and
yeah. I know.
the quality was like quite different and amongst them all. So you can't really,
Mm,
again, be cautious with that. But then when we look at recovery, there was a paper out by Hackney, I think it was 2019, and that's kind of when we were starting to look at it as well. So in a lot of sort of animal models, we're seeing that recovery might be affected by estrogen, in that muscle damage might be reduced, and sort of like the inflammatory responses. So we kind of
mm,
thought, oh, if estrogen's having that effect, maybe across the menstrual cycle, there might be points where we might recover better. And therefore, that could be why we might be adapting to that training response better, basically, is what we kind of were thinking. So we were wanting to look at menstrual cycle, hormonal contraception on the recovery from a training stimulus. And we had lots of sciencey based measures, and we were kind of halfway through, and we had lots of participants and it was great, but then COVID hit and we got sort of shut down, and all of those
yeah,
biopsies and bloods are now in the bins, which is such a shame that we had all of that data.
yeah.
But yeah, so recently we still wanted to do this project, obviously, and so we've transitioned onto a home-based study. So it's
Great.
a little bit less sciencey, in that we're now looking at questionnaires and we're not taking chunks of muscle out of people's legs. So
Yeah.
we actually, so it's a little bit better for the participants. But yeah, so that's kind of where we've went with that study. And we also got measures that are a little bit more. So we've kind of included jump performance within that as well. So with simple, strict measures. But what we were wanting to do is see if there's a difference in recovery. So our menstrual cycle group is totally full. So that filled up within like an hour, like it was insane. And we got over like nearly 400 responses, but we could only have sort of 21 in each group, which was such a shame because obviously for funding for the ovulation kits and the thermometers that we were using, so we couldn't take everyone. But out of those like over 400, we're still really struggling for oral contraceptive users, which I thought was really quite interesting, how many women were applying that were naturally menstruating. And I remember starting my PhD and they were like, oh, you'll find it really hard to get naturally menstruating females. And I was like, and it's been the total opposite. Like, we're really struggling for those on hormonal contraception at the minute. So if there's anyone listening,
I was going to say, I was like, plug.
Then
get in contact.
Get involved, please. Yeah. Yeah. So that's basically, hopefully, what we're going to see and maybe contribute a little bit more to the area.
Yeah, no, it's really interesting because even like on the two meta-analysis that you guys are working on, and that the Thompson one as well that came out in 2020, which is kind of looking at the resistance-based one, across all of those three, it was kind of the suggestions or I guess I could kind of see that was coming out in all of them was like, look, it kind of seems to suggest that estrogen supports recovery. It kind of seems to suggest that maybe those benefits of estrogen in that second half of the cycle when progesterone is higher is kind of like mitigated. You know, we're not really sure, but it seems to suggest, again, I know it's only 5 studies, that kind of that resistance-based stuff. And when I kind of tell people that, they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, literally, like, the studies were like 5 times a week in the follicular phase and then like once a week in the luteal phase, and they actually gain more muscle than a standard 3 times a week. And everyone's like, no. And I'm like, no, like, that's literally what. And again, I'm like, okay, like, pinch of salt with all the research papers at the minute because, you know, again, we kind of like that to be better quality, but like, still pretty interesting. It's pretty cool to kind of see something like that. So yeah, I think it's like, I'm looking forward to that coming out. Obviously, I would have loved if it was the muscle biopsy and all that kind of stuff as well. But but I think it's kind of one of those things like everyone's just doing what they can at the minute.
Yeah, no, we're getting obviously from Monday, our labs are sort of slowly reopening. So hopefully, maybe as I get this sort of by end of summer, we might be in there and get a little bit of that data. But that's just maybe I'm just hoping too much about that. But yeah,
no, I know. And I guess like for anyone listening, you know, I know there's been more that's coming out in this, and Edith Dale is like big on this. I know she kind of released something, was it last year, with the British standards, the kind of standardization approach. She kind of had like a paper, but I know this year it's come out with something that's like in a lot more detail about what I guess her recommendations are for like standardizing research into kind of female athletes and like, you know, different. I thought it was great because it's like different languages and or like different words you can use and like what that means, pros and cons and stuff. And it's actually really, again, I loved it because it's kind of all the nerdy stuff. But like, do you kind of, what's your, I guess, your kind of take on that, and kind of like where are you seeing the biggest gaps when it comes to, or the frustrations, let's say, if you're kind of looking back at other research papers or kind of trying to do your own studies with regards to the quality?
Yeah, no, I agree. That paper was great. When I heard that she was bringing it out, and especially all the authors that are on the paper, that's all the top people that you want in this field, really. Exactly. And it was a great paper, and basically it just said, sort of followed on from what we sort of found in the reviews, and that there wasn't that sort of high quality, and we kind of wanted to sort of change that and give females not only sort of increase in the amount of research that we're doing, but really increase that quality so we can really have those meaningful, impactful recommendations and discussions with female athletes. But you know, that paper is great, and hopefully it will sort of filter into research. And I guess one thing that we kind of, it's not funny, but it is funny, in that we kind of banged on about high quality research a lot in those 2 reviews that we did, and then obviously with Kirsty's follow-up paper, and now we've turned to home-based, and all of those sort of high quality that we had in the bloods and all the other measures that we had in the labs, we're now kind of back to sort of square one, and we had to think, what can we now do with the sort of what's available to us. And we've kind of lost a little bit of quality in that we can't have those blood measures, but we kind of,
Yeah.
well, I had to finish my PhD, and we've kind of done the best we can. And I guess that's all that we can really ask researchers to do, and that do whatever's
Mm,
achievable for you in that week so that we can get that high quality research. Yeah, so it is difficult researching in this area to begin with, and then obviously you do have to take in or count all of those other measures as well. But yeah, no, that
exactly.
paper was great.
So I think for anyone listening, you can correct me if I'm wrong here. I'm going to try and, I guess, summarize slash ask you if I'm correct. But the what I understood was, I guess, the kind of top quality with regards to confirming different phases of your menstrual cycle is kind of looking at the taking bloods and actually confirming the hormone concentrations at those different phases, like whether it's estrogen, progesterone, and at the kind of different points. And then are you guys now using kind of, I know you mentioned the ovulation predictor kits, that which just kind of tests that luteinizing hormone surge, which kind of happens just
Yeah.
before you ovulate. But what are you doing from like a menstrual cycle tracking point of view? Did you kind of get them doing that for a while beforehand and then do the study, or how did that work?
Yeah, so at the minute they're all basically tracking for one cycle beforehand in terms of they've all sort of self-reported all the measures that we needed before that, and then they're all
Yeah.
tracking for one whole menstrual cycle beforehand. So like that I said, those are using urinary ovulation kits as well as a thermometer. So we're taking daily temperature this time. Um,
Okay.
and then they again to go into the training, the actual testing phase, and that's basically where they carry on tracking menstrual cycle and ovulation and thermometers, and that's basically as good as we can get. So in the labs, we had those measures exactly the same, but all we were doing is taking bloods at the training session 3 points as well. So just to
Okay.
then subsequently verify that. But the only thing that we can't is we kind of now have to say they were in that phase. We think they were in that phase, and you
Yeah,
kind of just
yeah.
going to have to take our word for it. But we will, in terms of like excluding people, obviously, if they don't, so we're trying to predict ovulation. So basically,
Mm,
at ovulation, estrogen is already sort of on its sort of decline. So you kind of can't really wait until you get that positive ovulation test, then sort of test, if that makes sense, because estrogen's
mm.
quite low again, and you're getting a similar measure to that sort of period phase. But obviously, so there's a lot of variation between different women. But we're trying to sort of predict sort of 2 or 3 days before that when estrogen's high still in comparison to progesterone. So basically there's a measure of if they don't ovulate within sort of 48 hours of the training session, that's kind of where we get the exclusion. So we're just trying to keep it as
Okay.
best quality as we can. And if they don't get that rise in basal body temperature, that's also one of our exclusion criteria as well. So
Exactly.
yeah, we're just
I
kind of
think
doing the best we
that,
can.
yeah, and just for anyone listening there, the reason why you taking the temperature is because once you ovulate, you produce progesterone, and it's progesterone that kind of rises that core temperature, and you kind of actually see the kind of the changes in that
Yeah.
temperature when you're taking it every day. But as someone who does it myself, it's actually quite hard to do it at the same time every
Remember.
morning. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's like
yeah, no, it is. It's such a sensitive measure. And then having to say that to
mm,
people that have never really tracked their cycle before, or a mixed bag of people who have and who haven't, it's quite
yeah.
difficult to be like, oh, it's the first thing you need to do, and you need to sort of remember to do it. Sorry, I'm just getting told that I've been on Instagram too long today. So that's just popped in. If I suddenly cut off, that would be why.
No, it's all right. That's good. That's why I always get worried about those timers.
Yeah.
But no, and I think for yourself, kind of like, have you started bringing in any of that into your own training, or are you kind of I guess adapting? There's a obviously we're talking about the research and the kind of physiological side of that, and from the kind of sports science side, there's obviously this whole other area as well when we think about kind of from like a kind of self-care point of view and kind of like managing your energy, and there's people are starting to bring it into like their work life and kind of managing those sort of like projects and
Yeah.
everything. But are you bringing in any of that either more from the self-care or energy side, or from the sports side into kind of your to day life?
Yeah, no, definitely. So when I started sort of everything, I was like, oh, actually, I'm not doing this, so I should probably start doing it. And that's when
Yeah.
I kind of was really interested in it. And I was like, oh, I started taking my temperature as a rough guide of sort of ovulation and sort of
Mm,
identifying it rather than just counting those days. And then I started sort of actually tracking my cycle. So any signs, symptoms on certain days, and just generally sort of how I was feeling. And then I kind of took it sort of that one step further in that I wanted to look at performance and training and really see if there was a difference at all there. So I did sort of track like if I had a good performance, when did I have it, and also if did I feel like I recovered better at one point in my cycle compared to another, and just different things,
Mm.
just different measures like that, really. And no, I found it really useful, particularly I think when I was sort of performing at golf. I think it would have been really great to have sort of that data, in that I knew, in terms of, I always sort of suffered from really like period pains and cramps and symptoms around that cycle that would really affect my performance. But
Mm.
actually, if I'd known about when they more likely when I'm going to expect my period, and ways that I can sort of start in the days before or the whole cycle to sort of mitigate those effects and overcome that,
Yeah.
then I think it would have had a totally different effect on my performance. And also, even just simple things like knowing more about sort of period knickers and menstrual cups, when especially performing in
Yeah.
golf, when you're out sort of 4 hours without a toilet, and that sort of concern in your mind that, oh,
Yeah.
could be leaking or whatever, and it is just a concern, and it could affect performance easily by sort of taking up sort of brain space almost. And I guess things like that, and just being prepared. But no, I definitely think someone who does have or is sensitive to those really sort of hormonal fluctuations, compared to sort of, I chat to my friends about this all the time, and some of them are like, oh, I wouldn't even be able to tell where I'm a cycle, like I breeze
Yeah.
through it. And I'm like, who, like what? Like that's crazy. But yeah, for me, I'm definitely someone that really has a lot of signs, a lot of symptoms, and can notice those differences in performance and training quite easily. So I have found it really, really helpful for me personally.
Yeah.
And I guess for
I,
those people that aren't sort of seeing those differences, I guess I would always recommend sort of menstrual cycle tracking, even if it's just for those 3 months. And then you can say, actually,
mm,
you know what, that's not affecting me. I can put that to one side and just forget about it. And then you can easily pick it up at any point again in your future if you start noticing differences. But I guess it's kind of no risk or no risk involved in menstrual cycle tracking. And you can always kind of, if it's for you, then carry it on. But if it's not for you, just forget about it and move on,
yeah,
really. So
exactly. And like for me, I find it really useful because I started doing the thermometer checking as well, BBT. So I
yeah,
would have had always had like a really kind of regular cycles, like 28 to 30 days, like, we're kind of real like textbook stuff. Um, but I would have had quite bad PMS. So I kind of started getting really into it and
yeah,
started tracking my cycle. And then once I started taking my temperature, I actually realized that I had a really short luteal phase. So I kind of use this as an example a lot of times when I'm doing my talks, because I'm like, on paper, like everything's perfect, but
yeah,
actually, well, besides from the PMS, but then actually when I looked at it, like I had a really short luteal phase. So like that's a warning sign,
something
insofar
is,
as
yeah,
like
yeah,
something's missing. I'm either stressed or maybe I'm overtraining, underfueling, all these different things that could be coming into it. And
yeah,
again, like, I'm not trying to conceive, but if I was trying to conceive, that's an
yeah,
important consideration. And so, and that's normally my kind of go-to when I see something happen. So I had a couple of, I was just really stressful, as you know yourself, when you're trying to like launch something on the side or whatever, and you're trying to make content and everything, you're just like busy the whole time. And I didn't lose it, but I'm pretty sure I had like 2 cycles that were anovulatory and or like very
yeah,
short luteal phase, kind of like about 2 to 3 cycles in a row. So I kind of just stopped training. I kind of tried to reduce my stress and did all
yeah,
that kind of stuff. And again, I'm lucky insofar as I'm not an elite athlete. Like I literally train just to kind of feel good and move good, and all that kind of stuff. And I took up rugby, but that's stopped because obviously COVID. So I haven't been doing any. You're back. um, but for me, that was like a really, really kind of beneficial thing to notice, because I kind of, that's my, I guess, benchmark when something starts to go funny. If I can kind of see that reflected in my cycle, it kind of gets me to know that actually maybe I need to adjust a couple of things and make sure that I'm kind of managing my stress a bit better, or kind of making sure I'm prioritizing recovery. And you know, as you said, some people might not need or find it useful to have that tool, but for me, it's a really beneficial tool to kind of help me manage how I'm training, and am I kind of balancing all those different aspects of my overall health. So yeah, it's kind of interesting that you were having quite clear hormonal changes or kind of responses to that, where yeah, some of my clients are the same, they really feel it, and other people are like,
yeah.
I just go off how I'm feeling that week or that day and kind of adjust based on that. So, but I'd be like you.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I think it's quite surprising, like how many people actually think, "Oh, I'm not affected," and then do start tracking, and then actually maybe notice the odd sort of differences and changes. But what you were saying about that as well, about it being sort of a marker of just even tracking your period is enough at that sort of elite level, just to make sure that there's nothing sort of funny going
Yeah.
on in terms of that if you do lose your cycle, especially in terms of at that elite level, but also just in general life, because like you say, most of us are training as though we're elite level athletes when we're not, and then we're like running
Yeah.
from a job to another job and then not having time to fuel or recover properly, and that we could so easily end up in that sort of low energy deficiency or even stress, which can all have an effect on our menstrual cycle. But even just tracking your period and making sure it's sort of coming within those 21-35 days and you're getting it regular, it can be sort of a vital sign of that everything is okay and that everything's working
Yeah.
right.
No, absolutely. No, I think it's so important, and I think it's great. Even sure, you've probably seen it yourself. Like the kind of even in the last 6 months, there's been an explosion on Instagram about kind of different accounts talking about like menstrual cycle health and kind of awareness and everything. And I just think the more and more that people are aware that it's something to be aware of, and whether you want to incorporate it into how you train, or whether that's kind of yoga, or whether that's kind of, I
Yeah.
guess, a more competitive style sport, or kind of resistance based training, or whatever that is for you, that or even just your kind of day to day life, that it can really have an impact. And I think like just I'm looking forward to seeing all your research papers that are coming out and everything. And I'm always I've got my little Google Scholars alert set up, so it's always good to kind of see the stuff that's coming in, and then invariably you'll have a post up about it. I'm like, excellent, I'll just so it's always nice to kind of see that come through. But no, it's great. And I think like for anyone who is listening and who's kind of interested in that sort of the research side of it, and even for like, I guess, sports professionals, like people working in this area, it can seem a bit overwhelming when you kind of start talking about different menstrual cycle phases and how to even kind of start uh, approaching that. But I think, the content that you put out is really quite accessible and a really nice overview of what's out there at the minute, and kind of, yeah, so I'd really recommend it for anyone who's listening. But look, thanks so much for coming. It was absolutely
Yeah, no,
fantastic.
thank you for
I
having
feel like
me.
I could chat for ages about you, but I'm sure everyone
Yeah.
else is like, okay, stop talking about research papers. But no, it's excellent, and I'm very excited to see the kind of the recovery paper that you're coming out with as well. I think it's going to be very, very interesting, and kind of cool to see what's coming out there. But
Yeah, no,
yeah, no
thank
doubt,
you
no
so
doubt, I'll
much
be in
for
touch.
having me. Yeah, yeah,
Absolutely
no,
no
thank you
problem.
so much for inviting me, and I love chatting with you. So yeah,
Yeah,
speak to you soon.
perfect. Enjoy your Friday and have a lovely weekend.
Yeah, you too, you
See you
too.
later.
Bye.
Thanks so much. Bye.